The coronavirus pandemic hit us at a time we weren't ready, and it hit us fast. Our world went into a panic. We avoided our friends, and we watched our families grow up through a computer screen. For 2 years, we were living in fear. We would distance ourselves from everyone, hand sanitize after a high five, and would rarely remove our masks unless we were at home. Although our society was altered due to this historic change, our school systems also suffered. Our schools shut down and learning was halted. As schools began to reopen over time, they needed to adjust their ways to accommodate for the dangers that the pandemic presented. The University of Washington, in particular, was forced to accommodate, adjust, and adapt due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I had COVID a total of 2 times. The first time, I was a sophomore, yet I felt like a freshman. My first year at UW was completely online, so there was nobody on campus. And so when the university had the opportunity to open back up and be in person, some classes neglected the online option that was still very vital during this transitional process. One of my classes through my COVID experience had no online option. I had to miss 2 weeks of instruction, which made it hard and feel impossible to catch up on the rigorous university's coursework. The biggest lesson the university should learn from the COVID-19 pandemic is the use of Panopto recordings. This is a very feasible task, and I'll tell you why. Most professors already record their lectures, so it wouldn't be altering anything that they do. For those who don't already record, it's a simple task to open up Zoom and share your screen to allow access to class if someone is sick or cannot make it. The students at the University of Washington deserve to not have to feel afraid to come to class, just being scared about catching a virus. 80% of my sorority, when asked in January, were scared to catch COVID. And when asked further, 65% of that 80 were only scared to catch COVID because they thought they would have no way to stay caught up with classes. This brings me to the next lesson that I think the university should learn from the COVID pandemic, and that is to be more accommodating because you do not know what people have going on at home. The 65% that I mentioned before is a big number. It's a number that includes nursing and science students who are told that if they miss an exam, that will have to count as their drop for the quarter. It's a number that includes English students whose classes are not recorded, and if they miss a week or so of classes, they miss an entire unit. It's a number that includes architecture students who, if they miss class, they miss valuable critique that they need in order to progress on their projects. It's a number that includes students who have to miss in-person group project time or have to go in fear of getting the virus that they could bring back to their families at home. We do not know what is going on in people's homes. There's a vast majority of students who have to worry about a sick parent or living with someone who is elderly. Viruses such as COVID-19 cannot risk being contracted by those with underlying causes because it could cost them their life. Consider all of these worries that I have mentioned. Now add the stress of a chemistry exam, a computer science project, an English essay. College students are already going through a vulnerable and transitional time, and the added pandemic stressors heighten this. Students should have to benefit from the university's accommodations for their health and well-being. One of the reasons that quiz sections are so important is their required attendance. Many students already struggle to get excused from quiz sections before COVID hit, and now, even if they are excused, they miss all that valuable in-depth information from missing a class that is not recorded in that quiz section. March 1st, 2022. Vaccination is no longer required in public places. The fear of going out returns, and people no longer have the reassurance that those around them are also vaccinated. March 13th, 2022. Masks are no longer required in public places, schools, or universities. Some lives have become altered all over again. This declaration just took them back to the feeling that we all had when the world was first set back by this virus. Now that masks are lifted within universities, some students do not feel comfortable coming to class. With required attendance in quiz sections, those who are scared are forced to attend the germ-infested small classrooms. Those who cannot risk spreading the virus to their loved ones or are sick themselves are forced to miss quiz section and lose those valuable points. It would be beneficial for professors to allocate an alternative assignment to those students who cannot make it to quiz sections because they too should have the opportunity to make up those points. My best friend is an intended biology major. She expressed that whether or not she gets COVID, she is going to class. When I asked her, she explained that her professor does random calls, and if you miss a certain day and they call on you, then you lose those points for the entire quarter. Whether I have COVID or not, I am going to class. This is the power a few bonus points have on our students. It is the power to make students neglect their health and neglect the health of those around them. With alternative assignments, UW can offer an equal opportunity for students to succeed. Those with lower socioeconomic statuses cannot afford to catch COVID or be forced to be out of work for weeks. Some students with this status need to help support themselves or their families. An alternative assignment would take the stress off students and allow them to focus on their studies, knowing that they have just as equal of an opportunity to succeed as those who do not share similar stressors. The entire world was turned upside down by the appearance of COVID-19. The city of Seattle has had to make hard choices in order to accommodate for their residents, and universities need to as well. The University of Washington has been given an opportunity to learn and improve in this post-pandemic period. We can do so by continuing the use of Panopto recordings to be used by those who cannot come to class or risk exposure from class. The UW community can learn to accommodate students who need it, whether that be allowing alternative assignments or not requiring attendance at quiz sections. In the first week of January, we had a total of 1,200 positive cases, and that's just in the students that got tested. By the end of the quarter, we had a total of 38 positive cases. We did that. We learned from the initial strike of COVID what to do when we are racking up cases again, and we used that to keep our community safe. Let's use our love for discovery and our love for education and continue our learning on how to live with COVID rather than allowing COVID to create disparities in our society. Thank you.
While concrete data is limited, we know that COVID-19 disproportionately affects vulnerable populations. The Center for Disease Control shows that Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the United States experience higher rates of COVID-19 related hospitalizations and death when compared with white populations. And the disproportionate impacts don't stop there. In 2021, the National Council for Disability released a report titled "The Impact of COVID-19 on People with Disabilities," and the findings weren't surprising. NCD found that COVID-19 exacted a steep toll on the disabled community. Perhaps most poignant of all, the NDC found that students with disabilities were effectively cut off from their educational institutions. And the University of Washington exemplifies this finding. Disability resource services at every single University of Washington campus are not only out of legal compliance, but struggling to stay afloat. This is compounded when UW policy for any student who tests positive for COVID-19 are directed to DRS to submit a case. As such, disabled students who were already struggling to get foundational accommodations are left further and further behind, leading to a growing dropout rate for disabled students on campus. And it's this point that leads me to urge the consideration of 3 lessons the university should learn from the pandemic. First, accessibility is the key to an inclusive educational experience for all. Second, true change comes from equitable community partnerships, not top-down policies. And third, decisions that concern students must involve students. So first, Accessibility is the key to an inclusive educational experience for all. Now, at a legal level, we know this to be true. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1963 and Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, and sex. The ADA of 1990, in conjunction with Section 504 of the Rehab Act of 1973, was meant to eradicate discrimination against disabled students. So what happened? Why are so many of our current UW students under-resourced, under-supported, and underrepresented? Because the law on the books is not the same as law in reality. You see, as of right now, UW operates to meet the bare minimum. But recognizing that accessibility is the key to an inclusive educational experience and environment would ensure that UW does not only attempt to meet the bar, but devote resources, support, and representation to exceeding it. For example, first steps of tangible accessibility policies can be the devotion of funds to disability resources and technology. Currently, DRS at UW Seattle has less than 10 positions. Less than 10 positions at a school where 15% of the student body, over 7,000 students, identify as disabled. Even funding 10 more positions would enable ratios of accommodation case managers to dramatically decrease, allowing students to not only receive personalized care, but care at all. Moreover, UW can look towards funding Panopto and LectureCap technologies in all classrooms to ensure that lectures are offered in a hybrid manner and accessible to not only disabled students, but all non-traditional students, including international and commuter students who are continually subjected to barriers when attempting to get to physical campus. Now, I recognize that it's important to be practical, which is why funding mechanisms for projects should be considered. There are currently multiple committees on campus, such as the Student Technology Fee, who, since the pandemic, have built up reserves of over $10 million. And such committees, in conjunction with UW officials, have the ability to create university directives that would mitigate inaccessibility on campus. Secondly, we must recognize that true change comes from equitable community partnerships, not top-down policies. But what does that mean? It means honoring the capacity of your partner or your collaborator while considering your own positionality in the partnership. You see, top-down policies are indicative of institutional operations, but that doesn't mean equity has to be excluded from the conversation. For example, after spring break, the University of Washington released a campus-wide email that communicated masks, while encouraged, were not to be enforced anymore. The decision was made in collaboration with King County public health officials and university stakeholders, such as President Anna Marie Kause and other regents sitting at the top. There was no consultation with disability resources or centers, or other marginalized students and community groups. The decision to not enforce masks was not only detrimental to vulnerable students, but deadly. And this top-down policy paralleled the decision made by university officials to return to largely in-person operations at the beginning of spring quarter. Such decisions not only ignore students' demands for accessible learning, but invalidate them. The implementation of equitable community partnerships would mean the university worked alongside community members, disability centers and advisors, and other vulnerable and marginalized individuals to make communal decisions. And it means those decisions would be equitable, such as continuing to push for mask mandates because disabled and chronically ill students are adversely affected by looser restrictions. Another example of an equitable policy would be the continuation of hybrid learning, not only for disabled students who are too afraid to risk COVID-19 exposures on campus, but also takes into consideration the experience of commuter, international, and parent students. Which brings me to the third lesson that UW can learn in a post-pandemic era. Decisions that concern students must involve students. Combined with lesson 1 regarding accessibility and lesson 2 of equity, lesson 3 presents us with a new reality post-pandemic. It presents us with a university where students are directly involved in decisions made about their education. No, I'm not naive. I know that bureaucratic functionality does not always pave the way for the involvement of tens of thousands of students like we have at UW. But that doesn't mean students should be completely absent from the picture. Short term, this could look like creating more spaces for students to voice their opinions, and ensuring that these spaces are not only accessible physically, such as scent-free, wheelchair-accessible spaces, but also metaphorically, creating spaces that are BIPOC friendly, that are community oriented, and that prioritize student voices too often ignored. Tangibly, this could take the form of university student roundtables, where bi-monthly, students across different campuses representing different identities and groups have the ability to speak with individuals who often create those top-down policies we were just talking about. The facilitation of these spaces could be led by those very students and create productive policies that are not only informed by student voices, but crafted by the very students they will affect. From increasing accessibility, to prioritizing equitable partnerships, to amplifying student voices, each lesson feeds into tangible change at the university level, such as reinstituting mask recommendations, encouraging hybrid lectures, and creating student stakeholder roundtables. But the change wouldn't stop there. We could see change at a macro level. Increased public health safety, accessibility, and involvement encourages greater engagement of students in classrooms, and therefore increased engagement with the community. Instead of bounding students by inaccessible and inequitable practices, we have the opportunity to live up to the University of Washington's motto. If we take these lessons for what they're worth, we can truly be boundless.
Individually, we have all experienced loss, but collectively is how we will heal. The COVID pandemic has forced us to reckon with the reality that our expectations of what we perceived as normal will likely never be the same. And this is a good thing. Throughout the hardships of the COVID pandemic, we've seen the resiliency of our communities as the pain of disconnection also inspired a revival of meaningful connection. This connection has forged itself within each and every one of us as we relied on the appreciation of our closest family and friends and found hope within the acts of solidarity that came about through community members coming together during a time of crisis. We've seen how our strength lies in being part of a community, one that came together to support mutual aid efforts by keeping families united through virtual visitations, ensuring that those who needed it had access to nutritional resources through food pantries and financial support, sewing face masks for essential workers and medical staff when access to supplies was few and far between, organizing COVID vaccine drives for some of the most vulnerable members of our population, and so much more. Now, this lesson is one I am absolutely certain that the UW community has learned from the pandemic. Why? Because all of these mutual aid efforts are initiatives that have been done by UW community members themselves. We've shown up for each other time and time again when the stakes have mattered the most. Crisis may manifest itself again, but when it does, our community will rise to the occasion. As we have learned how to care for our community, we should also learn how to care for ourselves. In a pre-pandemic world that forced us to constantly be going, always on the move and rolling with the punches, the onset of the pandemic brought something none of us ever anticipated: a break, a moment to step back and reflect on what really matters most in our lives. Tomorrow is uncertain, so we need to take time to take care of ourselves today. The pandemic left us at our most vulnerable, and one of the most critical lessons the UW community should learn from it is that asking for support is a sign of strength. It's okay to take a few steps back to find balance in the midst of chaos. Mental health and self-care go hand in hand with learning and prioritizing the needs and wants of your mind, body, and soul. We can only care for our communities as much as we care for ourselves. Right here in Seattle, we can see how people have found strength, joy, and comfort in a time like no other. The North Star Cycling Club was founded just before the pandemic hit in February of 2020. Co-founders Edwin Lindo and Aaron Bossett spoke with Time Magazine back in May of 2021 on how the cycling club aimed to encourage more BIPOC individuals to take up cycling, and the spirit of inclusivity that extends to the cycling novice. The community has grown to more than 140 members who connect virtually via Slack, with anywhere from 25 to 85 members participating in Sunday rides for people of all levels and ages. This community inspired so many people to stay connected to one another, even during the pandemic, as so many found communities like the North Star Cycling Club that enabled them to have uplifting support systems to rely on. On campus, we have so many incredible clubs and organizations designed to help students find their community. Not only do I hope that UW learns the importance of community from the pandemic, but how your community can help you practice self-care and be your best self. As we make the return back to in-person classes and events, we've seen how the little things that are often taken for granted in our day-to-day lives matter so much. I found myself finding comfort in the drops of rain on my skin as I make my way back from class, or the smell of freshly roasted coffee beans during study sessions at the Suzzallo Library. My professors have talked about how the sounds of students chatting during partner discussions in our lectures have been a welcome return from the eerie silence of Zoom meetings. As we've been so caught up in the grand moments of life, we've forgotten just how important the small, intimate moments are to us as well. The pandemic reminded us to cherish these moments because we begin to realize the dullness of our realities without them. As we've seen just how important the power of community is to overcoming crisis, there's another power out there that the UW community should remember to take away from the pandemic as well. And that's the power of kindness. All across the country, we've seen immense losses and suffering as the pandemic has stirred anger and frustration amongst us. We've witnessed the grim realities of the chokehold divisiveness has on us. But even amidst so much fear, we saw powerful acts of kindness that kept us full of joy and determination to make the world a better place. Checking up on friends and family, spreading positive messages on social media, or showing our love and appreciation through acts of service are all simple tasks that I hope the UW community continues to enact and learn from, even long after the pandemic has come to an end. It taught us to be graceful in understanding and empathizing with one another. Finally, we should learn and be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Now more than ever, the COVID pandemic magnified the disproportionate inequities in our public health system. It began to redefine what it meant to have access and who was privileged enough to get access. It also began to highlight who was left behind. How do we move forward in recommitting ourselves to systems that have continued to let us down? This should be a lesson to all to stand up for what is right and learn when to step back to amplify the voices of who's around you. Champion for change that will radically transform our societal landscape to be one rooted in equity, justice, and compassion. We've all witnessed how laws and policies put in place by our elected officials helped change the course of the pandemic, for better or for worse. And we've seen how these have impacted us, our peers, and our communities in our day-to-day lives. If there is one lesson we should learn from the pandemic, it's the power that our voices have when it comes to advocating for social justice. Our experiences and insight as young people have influenced future leaders to fight for what they believe in. While the pandemic has taught us many lessons, it is up to us to take what we have learned and apply it to creating a brighter future for all of us and the future generations that follow in our footsteps to reimagine a world where anything is possible.
January 20, 2020. The first COVID case was confirmed in Washington State, near Seattle. March 13, 2020. The president declared national emergency. Lockdowns, school closures, and social distancing were all implemented. And dauntingly, for the next 2 years, this would be our life. The pandemic life was Zoom University. And now as cases finally begin to decline, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Restrictions lessening, in-person classes resuming. The experience we obtained from the pandemic that must be thoroughly reflected upon to become learnings, lessons for UW in accommodating students and in strengthening community. When students were scattered across the world, all adjusting with varying degrees, our accommodation becomes very significant. In a passage I got from one of my friends named Lily, she wrote to me, "I am 15 hours ahead in the most ruralist area, on the freaking mountain ranges. I am very scared and worried if education is possible at all. I have no computer. I will sacrifice sleep to stay up for lectures. I have to take care of siblings. I have lost a mother." Lily was quite frankly backed up into a very tight corner. She was in a different time zone, and she had a very complex situation. And there are no doubts that there were many others who suffered similar circumstances with differing degrees. To those who had to modify their schedules to pick up other ends and loose ends to survive, to those who have lost someone, a pillar emotionally or financially, all of them need to be accommodated for. And this is where UW steps in. And it's simple, and UW has the resources to do it. Recording lectures, allowing online discussions, hosting virtual office hours or meetings. We are allowing options, opportunities that the students don't and shouldn't have to decide between continuing their education or paying the bills. And as such, with recordings and slides being posted, Lily could still continue and do the material for her courses with her rental UW laptop that was sanitized, boxed, and shipped to her place for free. UW should continue to implement such methods, such recordings, for students who have exasperating circumstances. For students who do not have access to technology. And to accommodate for students who simply wish to learn, but there are other things getting in the way. In addition, another memorizing part of the passage Lily sent to me was that I am really thankful to the professors that have helped and understood me. One of my computer science professors told me to do my assignments at the pace I can do. I cried because it was like he was holding my hand and sympathize with me. Community is what came out of this hard time, where everyone is experiencing loss, confusion, hardship at the same time from the same thing. And in such a time, we need compassion. Compassion to those who have lost their jobs. Compassion to those who are not taking care of the sick. Compassion to those who have lost their lives and to those who are in mourning. And compassion to those who are working hard to save others. I've experienced such compassion from the community when one of my professors emailed the entire course saying, "I have extra masks. If you need them, I will send them. If you want to pick them up, here's my address." And I had other professors who hosted open hours for other students to come in and just talk about their troubles, about their experience, and just on how they're doing. And for the professor to just listen and be there. I thank all of those professors, as it shows that community matters and compassion matters. Compassion's true meaning is to suffer together, but in this case, it is to sympathize and bond together. A simple pat on the back, a moment of silence, it is to bring hope and understanding. That despite all the chaos, the sadness, the discord, we strengthen each other because we are holding each other upright. That we're not always suffering together, we are merely helping each other stand up straight. And this can be also applied to the university overall, for when they held sessions for other people to voice and protest against the suffering of anti-Asian hate crimes and the Black Lives movements. All of them allowed community to foster and to bond in this moment of great need. Simple acts of kindness really do go a long way. It is now April 29th, 2022, and these two simple lessons of accommodation and compassion are what UW should remember as we move forward to the day where our battle against COVID-19 is confirmed to be won.